2021, and this is our web chat. My name is Brad Haskamp. I am the State Adult Education Director at the Minnesota Department of Education. Jody, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. This is Jody Versa. I am the Program Quality Specialist on the team.
Thanks, Jody. Julie?
I'm Julie Dinko. I'm the Transition Specialist.
Astrid.
Hello, this is Astrid Leiden. I'm the Professional Development Specialist. Good to have you all here.
And I think we also have Todd from our team on the webinar. Todd, are you here? Todd, I unmuted you.
Yes, hello everybody. Great to be with you.
And Todd is joining us as our Adult Education and High School Equivalency Specialist in his new role. Today we have quite a few items on the agenda. We will be talking about our statement on student eligibility and distance education. We'll also be turning it over to Tom Citron-Heisem from Literacy Action Network to talk about the impact report. Then we'll be turning it over to Susan to talk about distance learning and technology. Susan Wetkamp-Brandt with our distance learning and tech team. Then we'll be talking about potential funding to support student technology access. And then we have our accountability section, data, grants, and assessment. After that, transitions, then professional development, and we'll end with time for questions and next steps. So let's dive right in. One key message we would like to share with you as a strategy for 2021 and even beyond is to kind of focus right now, or to start focusing on and analyzing on keep, throw, or adapt. And we want to encourage you to take some time to reflect and think about what have you learned during this pandemic that you'd like to keep and sustain within your program or within the practices that you've developed. We hope that you're continuing to focus your efforts on effectively serving your community. Some things that we see in terms of keeping, we hope to see increased high quality distance education looking forward, as well as hybrid options, long-term, as in addition to the in-person instruction. We're hoping that we're hoping to tell a little bit more today. Susan will be sharing about new developments that are coming with distance education, like the teacher verification model for lessons, or what you'll often hear as TVM. So continue to think and take some time. What in your current practices, or maybe your pandemic response, what do you hope to keep? What do you hope to throw? What maybe needs some adapting as we move forward here? And again, with the focus on serving your community as effectively as possible. So to start off, I would like to turn it over to Jody Versa to talk about student eligibility and distance learning. Jody.
Great, thank you, Brad. So we wanted to touch briefly again on this topic that we started talking about last fall. If you go on to the next slide, Brad, our team put out a statement on student eligibility and distance learning because that is such an important issue for us in this time in adult education. And we want to thank all of you, or many of you, who participated in the fall manager meeting and gave us some feedback about this statement. At that point, we had a draft version, and then we tweaked a little bit based on your input and put out a final version in December. You can find that document as one of the materials on this webinar. It's also posted on the mnabe.org website. And it was sort of originally distributed via email in December. So we just want to take a minute to touch on and remind you some of the issues and the guidance in that document. On the next slide are just kind of a framework, kind of things to keep in mind. As we know, we have all shifted so much of our programming towards distance learning over the last 9 months, because we've been forced to do so. So we know that then, as a result, there have been a lot of questions coming up about students who are physically quite distanced or quite a ways away from your actual programming location. So we just want to remind you of some of the key questions to be asking if and when you end up serving students who are not residing, in your immediate community. And just keeping in mind that in general, our funding for our statewide adult education system here in Minnesota is distributed geographically, and we are all sort of tasked with serving particular communities. So we need to be aware of these issues and these questions. As we know you are, and we know you are asking these questions. So just a couple of specific scenarios to be thinking more about. On the next slide, we just want to remind you of the guidance about students who move out of state. We know that's happening. We know many of you have been asking questions about that. I won't read all of this to you, but just to remind you that it is possible and makes sense that you might continue to serve a current student for a period of time after they move to another state, but you shouldn't do that indefinitely. And then on the next slide, another scenario that we know is coming up is you might be serving a student who then moves back home to their home country. And again, our general guidance is you may have good reason to continue serving that student for a limited amount of time, but not indefinitely unless you are treating them as a non-NRS student, and then their hours wouldn't count for funding hours. So we just wanted to reiterate that statement and the guidance that's there, because we know that those questions will continue to come up over the upcoming months and over the year of 2021 and into the future. As we are talking about this issue of distance learning and who can we serve, we want to point out one other important area on the next slide, where we really do encourage you actually to be thinking more broadly than just your physical programming location. So we want to acknowledge that distance learning can be a really powerful tool and approach to career-focused programming, to career pathway programming or IET programming. So we do encourage you to think about how regional or even statewide collaboration using distance learning for career-focused programming could be a value add to your program. And I'm going to hand it off to Julie to talk a little bit more about the specifics about that.
Thank you, Jody. If we could move to the next slide, please. There are a lot of different benefits to offering online statewide adult career pathway training or integrated education and training classes. And basically, if you put the learner first, learners have access to multiple career-focused training options instead of just a few or none. I know that the larger school districts have been able to offer more than one or two, but when you look out in greater Minnesota, it's pretty difficult to try to consistently offer a variety of different career pathways or IET trainings. So this sort of opens the doors to allowing more trainings for learners. And they also have access to programming at various times that might better fit their schedule than what their local program might offer. And again, it also benefits those learners who may live in rural or remote locations and don't have access to transportation or have difficulty getting transportation. And for programs, they have a better chance of filling their classes, which generally make it more cost effective. And this would really be the time to pilot this type of programming to better serve adult learners. There's several models that we could develop through the pilot, and I'm hoping people are trying some of this out. I know in some regions they are doing this. And I just want to remind people, if we look at the next slide, of the career-focused online statewide classes. This is a report that is in SID, the Student Information Database, and what's listed on this report are classes that are available for any learner to enroll in. So if you have a learner who is interested in manufacturing, but you're currently only offering healthcare career pathways, please take a look at these classes and contact the manager and see if the learner can be enrolled in a course somewhere else in the state. And that's all I have there. I think we're moving on to Tom with the impact report.
Yep, you are correct, Julie. Thank you so much. And Tom, we'll turn it over to you. Let's make sure we have you unmuted.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see you, so to speak. I'm just going to talk very briefly on behalf of Literacy Action Network about the recent update to the MN ABE impact report, which deals with our response to the pandemic. If we go on to the next slide. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what the impact report is for those of you who may not know. It's a comprehensive document that we started putting together quite a number of years ago as part of our Supplemental Services Grant for Land that summarizes adult basic education needs and services in Minnesota. And it's been, it's very comprehensive. It has all sorts of very detailed information. And it's used a great deal, especially by policymakers and legislators as they try to become more familiar with what adult education is and what we do. As well as professionals in our own field to inform their work. And one of our tasks each year is to update the impact report to reflect changing circumstances, new developments, and other sorts of things that are happening. I think you go on to the next slide. So this year, in consultation with the state staff, we decided to focus our update on the pandemic and how we had responded. We felt this was a really important thing to gather in terms of both currently what we are doing, and then ultimately, hopefully, for historic reasons, how we responded to this very unique set of circumstances. So there are 4 main sections to the report. Is it possible to share my screen so I can show people the report? Or not?
Yes, just one second. Let me make you the presenter temporarily.
I have 2 monitors. I'm hoping I can do this.
Okay, Tom, you are now the presenter.
All right, hang on just one second. Okay. I don't think this is. Okay, can people see this or not?
Not
Brad?
yet. We're not seeing your screen. We're not seeing your screen yet.
Okay, that's interesting. I hit share screen, so I don't really know what's happening. Well, it's not crucial. Why don't we just go back to the slides? That's going to be, I think, it'll work better.
Tom, I will say though that it is included in the materials if people want to look at it there. Yep.
All right, so we'll just go back to the slides because I have most of the material there. So, okay, so we can go on to, so anyway, we have 4 main sections on the report. The first details what happens when the pandemic begins, what happens, and how we had to adapt virtually overnight, as well as many other educational services throughout the state and the nation. Then we talk about the major innovations that the field developed in dealing with the pandemic. And when you sit back and think about the things we have done, we have really done a tremendous number of things. Then we have a section where we talk about what did we learn and how might that inform our future work. And then we had a section with some short scenarios from AB educators in Minnesota in terms of how they responded to this very unique set of circumstances. Next slide, please. So this just shows it doesn't unfortunately show the entire report, but this is the first part of the report. It's just a couple of pages long. We try to just be very concise in what we talk about so that it's easy to read and we don't get lost in too much verbiage and so on. Next slide. So a few suggestions on how the impact report might be used. As I mentioned earlier, it really has a lot of very detailed information and data about how adult education in Minnesota works, who we serve, how we serve them, how we have developed over the years, sections on things like the adult diploma, workforce, and various other issues. We talk about in this update about how we adapted to the pandemic to meet student needs, and that's always foremost in our minds. And this can be used to inform marketing, to assist with outreach, all sorts of different kinds of things. And it is available on the LAN website, and Julie said it's on the list of attachments to the meeting. If we could go to the next slide. So one of the main things that we do in terms of the report is through the Literacy Action Network Legislative Committee. We use it a great deal when contacting legislators. And we have received over the years a lot of compliments on the report because it really provides legislators with a way of, who may be new to adult education, not know very much about it, a way to get familiar pretty quickly. If they take the time to skim through parts of the report, they really will have a very good sense of what we do. We think that the addendum, the addition that we did this year, will help communicate how we served our students during this very difficult time. I don't know, I think that our legislators are pretty aware of the stresses within K-12. My fear is they may be a little bit less aware of how we have struggled in adult education with many of the same circumstances, and how our efforts to work with adults really impacts K-12 because so many of our students have children in the K-12 system. And it is a way of talking with legislators to support our funding needs in the future, present, and the future, to continue developing successful services that will help meet people's needs. So I think we'd like to, people could just, if you have any ideas about either how you have used the impact report or how you could use the impact report in the future for various purposes, if you would just enter that in the chat, that would be great. And Brad, I think that is probably my last slide, as near as I can remember.
Yep, that is correct. Well, thank you, Tom, and thanks to Literacy Action Network for revising and creating an update to the impact report. I think being able to share our story right now is very important, especially as we go into this legislative session. So I hope that many of you locally are able to find or able to use this addition to the impact report, as well as the entire impact report, to help you tell your story. And I thank you to everyone that is sharing ideas in the chat right now. I'm seeing a lot of great suggestions about using it with community ed presentations, using it, Lan was using it to the new Minnesota Senate Education Committee chair in a meeting. This is able to tell your story, as Laura notes, with local employers and with the community about the benefit of ABE. Excellent. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. So at this point, we're going to turn it over to Susan Wetkamp-Brandt from our Distance Learning and Technology team. Susan.
All right, thanks for having me on. We've got obviously a lot going on in distance learning and technology, the statewide team, just like all of you folks out there in the program. So if you want to go to the next slide, we'll get right into it. The first thing I want to talk about is our professional development initiative, the Technology Integration Initiative Cohort. We're starting that a little bit later than we do some years, but it is still going to go forward. And this year, the cohort is going to be focused on digital equity plans. And we have exciting news that we are going to be able to offer a $2,000 stipend to programs through supplemental services unspent funding to programs so that they can actually implement their digital equity plan and purchase devices or hotspots, pay for staffing time or promotional materials, those kinds of things, because it's really hard to start new programming without a little bit of seed money to get that going. So that's a really exciting development. We don't have the registration form open yet, but I'm hopeful it might even actually be up today. today, but certainly by the end of the week, with our new Literacy Minnesota website that we've only had for about a year, I don't actually have editing rights to all the pages, so I haven't been able to get in there and change the website. So I'm trying to work with folks internally at Literacy Minnesota to get the page updated, so the form will be there for you. But look for that by the end of this week, no later than Friday. The whole cohort will be virtual this year. So typically we have an in-person kickoff followed by virtual meetings throughout the spring. But this year, obviously for COVID-related reasons, we're going entirely virtual. And in the past, this has been a cohort opportunity specifically for teachers because we had focused on classroom technology integration. But this project will be focusing on writing a digital equity plan for your program. And so we really would like to see, just like with the distance learning 101 cohort, somebody from a manager or administrator role, as well as someone with a teaching role, working together so that both of those perspectives can be included in writing the digital equity plan. If you're in a very small program in Greater Minnesota, for example, and you wear all the hats and do both managing and teaching roles, you could apply alone. I think that would be fine. We just want to have both perspectives reflected. My colleague Jason Brazier is the one who's heading that up, and you can see his email address there on the slide, and he would be happy to answer any questions about that project. And we're hoping to be able to accept up to 12 programs, so that would be up to 24 participants in that project. So looking forward to kicking that off on February 2nd. You can go to the next slide. And so another project that is getting started is around digital navigation. And I think I'm going to actually call on my colleague Kirsten to talk about the first bullet point here. And then I'm going to ask everybody to take a look at the questions below that and consider them, and maybe drop some answers in the text chat, or indicate if you'd like to be called on to speak and answer out loud. So Kirsten, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thanks, Susan. So we just offered the position to someone and they accepted as a temporary digital navigation specialist. So there'll kind of be three main areas that this person will be working with. They'll be working with Rob through our volunteer and outreach, volunteer training grant. The first area is they would be doing like a statewide audit regarding remote volunteer needs. So connecting with programs across the state to find out what remote volunteer needs might be. Second, they'll be creating digital navigation toolboxes and resources and making sure that those are shared across the state. So if digital navigation is something that programs are interested in doing more with, they'll have resources that they can use to get a program started, to help train volunteers, etc. And then last, they'll be helping with some hands-on navigation for those who want to start their own digital navigation program. And they'll offer some additional support for those who complete the TII that Susan just talked about. So if you're interested in that, there'll also be some kind of additional follow-up support. I don't know if Rob is on this call and he wanted to add anything.
I'm not seeing Rob, Kirsten.
Okay.
Thanks for sharing that information.
Sure.
So yeah, thanks, Kirsten. So with this whole new project starting, I think it would be a really good chance in this web chat to hear from folks around the state. Is this a service you're already providing to students, which is to say, are you sort of working with your students to figure out how they can get internet at home, providing orientation to how to use Zoom, for example, or how to install Zoom on your device, or doing technology troubleshooting for students who are having trouble accessing? Is that a service people are already providing? If not, would you like to offer that service? And then what sort of supports or assistance would be needed if you wanted to offer that service? And that information can then feed into what the digital navigation specialist will do and what we focus on in the TII. Mm-hmm. So Brian, in Central Minnesota, are your teachers doing that work directly? Right, so it looks like a number of people are weighing and saying, yes, we're doing this work, but we need to do more. There's always a need for more, right? And of course, staff time is very limited. So a good thing to note is that the stipend for the TII can be used for staff time if that's what you need, or it could be used to buy devices for your learners or hotspots, whatever it would be that your program would need most. So yeah, CTEP also, I see Kathleen Moriarty talking about CTEP, that we also have a CTEP member at Literacy Minnesota who's been doing a lot of this work for our learners as well. It's a great resource. So it sounds like a lot of folks are having their teachers do this work directly, rather than having a separate person who's specifically dedicated to that work. CTEP is the Community Technology Empowerment Program. It is an AmeriCorps state program, and I believe right now they are taking applications for new CTEP members, if I remember correctly. Kirsten, I know we were applying for one. If you have any more information that you could share about CTEP, I think feel free. Oh, Astrid, thank you for putting the link in for CTEP into the chat. That's great.
And it looks like Kirsten says they're due the 22nd, so there's still time to get in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can
yeah,
just
and CTEP. Oh, go ahead.
Quickly, CTEP, just so everyone is aware, CTEP has sites in the Twin Cities metro area, but not across the entire state. So FYI.
Okay. I didn't know that. I think maybe they used to have outside of the metro, but maybe not anymore.
Sorry, maybe if somebody understands differently, chime in, but that was the case when I was a CTEP supervisor, that
Okay.
they only placed members here in the Twin Cities.
Okay. And as Kathleen notes, CTEP is a little bit different from some other AmeriCorps programs in that some AmeriCorps programs are focused really on capacity building, whereas CTEP is really focused on direct service to learners. So that's great, really great chat here, and I think I'm hoping I can download this chat and share it with our new digital navigator. That was really a lot of great information. Thanks so much, everybody, for sharing. Can we go on to the next slide, please? All right, a few other updates and announcements. Last fall, as you probably know, the distance learning team put a pause on platform and course approvals for distance learning. We're actually extending that pause until March 1st because that is when we're going to start sort of releasing all of the new stuff is at the spring teaching and learning conference that's replacing the regionals in the spring. Everything is going to be sort of grand opening announced at that conference. So we're sort of holding the pause until then. And so at that conference, we're going to be unveiling the new teacher verification model. And that is a system by which teachers will be able to verify distance learning work that students have done outside of an approved platform and outside of a learning management system. So if the teacher is emailing work to students, if the teacher has a class website that isn't in a learning management system and they post their work there. so that the teacher can verify the student work and count hours for that. That whole process and the training around it is all going to launch at that conference on March 5th. The distance learning website is also moving. It is moving home to Literacy Minnesota. It's going to become part of the Literacy Minnesota website, and we're going to hopefully have a sort of grand opening for that at the spring conference as well. We're already working with the developer, and we've seen some designs, and it looks really great. I think everybody's going to be really pleased with the look of the new distance learning website. And then last but not least, our Moodle site has moved. If you have been using our online courses for volunteer training, professional development, the courses for adult learners that previously were on LearnerWeb, all of that moved to a new link. And unfortunately, we're having some technical difficulties getting the old link to redirect to the new link. So a lot of people are having trouble finding the site. So I wanted to make sure everybody has the link there, and thanks Astrid for putting it in the text chat. Everything else is exactly the same. Your logins are the same, everything else. We just updated the URL to include our new name since the old one was quite outdated. And I think that's my last slide, but I think if you go to the next slide,
Yes.
we'll be clear.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. We do have some questions, and we do want to make sure we take time for some questions right now about some of the distance learning and technology updates. So one question that came in, Susan. So is the information coming out in the spring conference different than the time on task / unit completion applications?
Yes, Jason, it is. So those time on task and unit completion applications will stay there. And those are for if you do develop a course in a learning management system. So if that's what your teachers are doing and you have a course that meets the course definition, it covers a set of content and it has specific standards that it's aligned to, and it has all those features, then you can continue to use those. But if the work your teachers are doing sort of doesn't fit that model, if you are planning English language learning content sort of week by week or every couple of weeks based on who's coming to your class and what their needs are, it might not fit the course sort of definition, right? So this new teacher verification model is designed to address that kind of online instruction. Oh, very good comment, Astrid, in the chat, that the TVM model will be used for lessons rather than courses.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Astrid. Any other questions right now for Susan about the distance learning and technology updates? We want to make sure everyone is aware and can process these updates. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions right now, but we will have more time for question and answer at the end of the session. Well, thank you so much, Susan. Distance learning and technology have been such an important area and a big area for innovation this year. So we thank you for all of your efforts, and we thank the entire team for all of their work. Moving on, I'm going to turn it over now to Astrid to talk about potential funding to support student technology access. Astrid.
Thank you, Brad. So yes, as we've been hearing so far in the chat on this webinar and really throughout the year and in our PD survey, we know that many of our students are experiencing significant challenges in accessing our services because of a lack of devices or access to the internet. And so our team, along with the support network providers, have been working to think about some ways that we might use potential underspending in our supplemental service grants to address this need. And we wanted to use this opportunity on web chat to get your feedback on one of our ideas before moving forward with it. So due to all of our in-person events being canceled this current year, we have some significant anticipated underspending in our current year supplemental service grants. And we are thinking about using a significant portion of those funds and forwarding them on in grants to you all in local programs to support student technology access and use. But before we do that, we have a number of questions for you to try to determine whether this would be useful and something that you can use. So Brad, let's go to the next slide. We are going to conduct several polls here to get your input. And the first question we had for all of you was really around, could you use additional funding? So Carla, I'm going to ask you to launch that first poll question. And that question is, do you anticipate spending all of your FY21 state and federal ABE funding? So we're going to ask you to choose yes or no. If you're not sure, go with the most likely scenario. I'll give you 15 more seconds. Okay, let's go ahead and close that and show the results, Carla. So it looks like the majority of you do anticipate spending your current year funding, 86% of you. So that's helpful to know. So let's go on to the next question, which is, could you use a small amount of additional funding to support student technology access? So this funding would be a minimum amount. We're thinking of it at least $2,000 and allocated using a formula tied to your current year state funding. So could you use that additional funding to support student technology access? So we're thinking setting up a device lending, purchasing devices to set up a device lending program, supporting staff time to help students use those devices and navigate platforms so that they can get connected to your educational programming. Give folks just additional few seconds here to respond to that one. Okay, Carla, let's go ahead and close that poll. And it looks like, yes, this would be something that would be useful to your programs. I'm really glad to hear that. So we're thinking, again, a minimum of about 2,000 and could potentially go up several thousand depending on the size of your program. So the next question that would be helpful for us is for you to tell us how you might use that additional funding. And we'd like you to check all that apply for this question. If you could use the funding, and it sounds like most of you could, would you be using this to purchase devices to loan to students, to purchase hotspots, to pay for additional staffing to support students with technology, or for some other purpose? And you can check all that apply. And if you do check other, if you can just pop in the chat other thoughts you have for how that funding might be used. Okay, let's go ahead and close that one, Carla, please. So it looks like from your responses, people would be doing all of the above, purchasing devices, getting internet access, and supporting students through extra staff time. That is really helpful to know. Another thing we're hoping you can just pop in the chat again, if thinking about that general amount of about $2,000, we know that that might be able to purchase different things in different contexts. So if you have an idea based on pricing that you've done for these types of purchases in the past, if you have a thought about what you'd be able to do with that amount of money and you would like to share that in the chat, that would be really helpful to us as well. And then our final question for you, again, before we move forward, is do you think we should proceed with this plan of using a significant portion of the underspent supplemental service funding to support student technology access? Okay, let's go ahead and close that. Oh. Thank you. Okay, well, that's pretty clear. It looks like almost everyone agrees with moving forward with the plan, and that's what we wanted to hear, to make sure that you all thought that this would be a good use of that funding, and really thank you for providing your input. Let's go to the next slide. As we think about our next steps with this, we want to move forward as quickly as possible. Brad, if you could advance to the next slide. Brad, I am still not seeing the next slide. Brad, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you advance to the next slide?
Yep, sorry, my computer glitched out and I was offline for a couple minutes here.
Okay. So while Brad's getting to the next slide, just to let you know, our next steps in thinking about this will be to reach out to the fiscal agents of our all of our consortia to give you an opportunity to opt into this additional funding, similar to the process that we used for the computer-based testing administrations that we distributed. And then we really hope that you will access the digital navigation support that Literacy Minnesota is going to be providing through their digital navigation specialists. So we'll make sure that you all have information you need to access those services.
Astrid?
Yes.
It looks like my computer has been logged off of the internet and of GoToTraining. I'll keep my phone on, but right now, if I try to re-log in, I'm scared I might lose everything. I'm wondering if Jody or someone else from our team could take over the controls.
Absolutely.
Sure. Do you want me to take over?
Yeah, I will make you the presenter, Jody.
Oh, wait. Yep. It's going to take me just a minute to get the slides open to the right spot.
Thanks for your patience, everyone.
Okay.
There we go.
Confirm that looks right, Astrid? Yes?
Yeah, that looks great. Thank you, Jody.
Okay. Yep.
Okay, so let's, I know there have been a lot of chats coming in, lots of ideas for how people might use that additional funding. I'm really excited that we're going to be able to do this. And so stay tuned for more information for how you'll be able to access the funding. I do see a question about when programs would receive the funds and would it need to be spent by a certain time. And it would need to be spent this fiscal year. And in terms of the distribution, as soon as possible. Hopefully we can get this figured out in the next month or so, so that you can move forward with plans. I am not seeing any other questions. Okay, and we'll have time at the end for additional questions. So let's move forward, Jody.
Okay. Are you able to hear me, Jody or Astrid?
Yes, we hear you, Brad.
Excellent. Well, let's talk accountability, data, grants, and assessment. We're going to start with some key data resources for you today. So let's dive into data. We have 4 resources that we want to share with you today in regards to data. One is the National Reporting System website. On this website, you can see state and federal level data and reports that have been reviewed and approved by the federal government. And you can see the website there, just nrs.ed.gov is that website. In your public access, you will be able to see only things that the feds have approved and reviewed themselves. You won't be able to see, for example, the data we submitted in October this year. Usually that takes several months for the feds to review that data and those reports. Also attached is our state performance report for adult education in Minnesota. So you can see that report. This is the same report we shared in October or in November when we had our fall manager meeting. One other thing that's coming yet is employment outcomes by consortium. We were about ready to get those prepared to show off for each consortium. Here were the employment outcomes for your students when we discovered a glitch in that data. And we asked DEED and their state performance team to review that glitch and to try to resolve that. And they're still working on that. Once that is resolved, we will be able to prepare a report for you that shows your consortium's employment outcomes according to the WIOA indicators, which will be great for you to have on hand. Then finally, I know some of you really do like to dive a little bit further into the data and ask some big questions about the data, like what are we seeing in terms of our performance, maybe by barriers to employment or by different demographic data. Maybe there's some key things that you want to find out from the data that you'd like to ask. So I'm hosting an in-depth data analysis on Thursday, February 18th from 3 o'clock to 4:30. And here we'll dive into the 2020 statewide adult education results. And we'll talk about consortium level employment outcomes, hopefully. And we'll let you raise some questions that you have as you saw the data. I know some of you were asking some great questions when you initially saw this data. And I'd like to be able to document those questions a little further and see how we might look and analyze that a little closer. So it'll be a great time to be a very informal, conversationally led session where you can talk about data issues that you see from the data, and we'll try to pull information from that session. And there, again, at the bottom is the link to register. Let's go to the next slide. Then we're going to turn it over for grants and applications. I think we're starting off with Astrid.
Yes, thanks, Brad. So let's go to the next slide. We are approaching another round of supplemental service grants. Our supplemental service grants come from state funding. 3% of our state funding is used for supplemental services grants. And they run on a 3-year cycle with annual approval during those 3 years. Our next round of grants will be posted hopefully by February 16th. And those proposals will be due on March 19th. And again, a huge thank you to everyone who took the time to respond to our professional development survey or statewide survey. We're using that data to inform the activities that are in those grants. And I want to let you know that we are looking for reviewers for our supplemental service grants. We'll need at least 8 people to participate in the review. This is an excellent opportunity to learn more details about the amazing services that our provided through this grant program. So if you are interested and willing to review grants, please, you can email me directly. I'll pop my email into the chat in a minute, and let me know of your interest. And that review period would likely be happening the second half of March and early April. I'll turn it back over to Jody.
All right, thank you, Astrid. So just a reminder to everyone that, as usual, you will need to be thinking about your annual application for state and federal ABE funds, which is due on June 1st. Keep in mind that this year, that application will again include Table A1, which you filled out last year, and you will submit hours for the same time period as you submitted in June of 2020, because remember that we will be reusing that count of hours from that time period, March 14th, 2019 to March 13th, 2020, in the upcoming year's calculation of funding. Meaning that if we have the same total of statewide funding for our system, that every grantee would get the same amount as this current fiscal year. So just a reminder about that. However, also remember that we will still be asking you to submit a regular Table A, which will include your hour counts and your student counts from May 1st of 2020 to April 30th, 2021. We will not use those hours in the funding formula, but we do expect that you are accurately tracking and recording those hours, and we do need to be tracking those hours and that information from that time period as well. So just a heads up about those aspects of the annual application this year. As usual, we will be providing some more support and training for you this spring around the annual application. Traditionally, we do a spring grant application workshop. In other years, we have done that in recent years, we have done that at the spring regional events. As we know, this year we are not going to be in person for those events. So we have decided to provide you that training in these two ways, or you have these two options for accessing that training. Like we did last year, we will put together some screencast videos that will give you an overview and instructions for the specific application document as well as the individual tables. We'll record those and post them on the mnabe.org website sometime in April, and we will be sure to let you know when those are there. Then we will, in May, you'll have a chance, to do that workshop to get that information in a live training as part of our May web chat, which is scheduled for May 5th. So be watching and be waiting and expecting some more training on the annual application yet this spring. And then we also at this point just want to give you a reminder that the annual application is where it is possible for grantees to change membership. However, if there is any discussion or any thought about potential membership changes, you need to notify our team by February 1st. So that deadline is quickly approaching. So we just wanted to give you a reminder about that. And then also a reminder for 5-year narratives. This group of consortia on the left here is the 2021 narrative cohort. I know you know who you are. I know that folks in those programs have already started the work of that narrative. And for those of you in these consortia, the next potential step in the narrative process is we can, as a group, if you all would like to, decide to have kind of a check-in webinar, maybe in February or March, if you want to, put our heads together again, hear where other people are at, kind of recalibrate a little bit. So be watching for some communication from me about that possibility. And then also just a reminder for everyone that in 2022, there will be a pause, a year off from the regular 5-year narrative cycle. And instead, all current ABE consortia will need to submit in 2022 the application for federal adult education funds. So the last time we did this was 2017. And in 2022, we will need to repeat that competition. So just know, not for you to, to worry too much about yet, but just have in mind that that is coming. And then the year after that, in 2023, we will restart the regular narrative cycle. So I think I'm going to hand it back to Brad now to talk about assessment.
Excellent. Thank you, Jody. So one quick item regarding assessments, specifically high school equivalency assessments, is MN GED 30 is back up and running. And thankfully, we've been approved just to keep that going throughout the rest of this fiscal year. So for any testing from now until June 30th, 2021, your students, your potential testers, can use the MN GED 30 code. And again, that works for any student with a Minnesota address testing at an approved testing center that is either in Minnesota or in one of our border communities, and is typically non-corrections unless the correctional facility is not paying for the GED testing in this case. One other thing I would just like to note about the MN GED 30 code, we do believe that that will last the rest of the year. We think the allocation will likely be sufficient. However, we do not know that for sure yet. And it's also important to know that we do not know what the allocation will be starting July 1 for the GED or the high school equivalency testing subsidy. So there are some things that are up in the air and yet to be determined by the legislature. Let's go to the next slide. We also wanted to clarify an issue regarding computer-based testing and remote testing. We've heard some programs having this misconception that online testing automatically means remote testing. And so the terms that we want to try to clarify and try to use more frequently are computer-based testing and remote testing. Computer-based testing is any assessment that is administered via computer, and that could be taking place in a computer lab at an adult education center. There is also remote testing, which is computer-based testing that is done at a distance. And so that is someone working on completing the test, not typically in the adult education program. And so with that, they are different. There is specific training for computer-based testing, and there's additional testing for remote testing, or additional training for remote testing. Computer-based testing and proficiency in computer-based testing is a prerequisite for remote testing. And it's necessary to implement and be comfortable with the computer-based testing before you do the remote testing. Let's go to the next slide. Sorry, Christine, the last line that was covered up by the toolbar was just saying it's necessary to implement and be comfortable with computer-based testing before doing remote testing. And just FYI, for anyone that wants to remember anything from the slides, that the materials, in the materials tab, there's a PDF of the slides, so you can download those and check all of those out yourself. One other thing that we want you to chat in on, we'd like to hear from you a little bit more, computer-based testing and remote testing. Chat in and let us know who's doing computer-based testing at this time, who's doing remote testing. We've been doing some distribution of computer-based tests, so we want to hear from some of you. Are you able to do any computer-based testing at this point? Are you able to do any remote testing at this point? Please chat, let us know. Let us know which program you're with, and if you're doing computer-based testing and or remote testing. Hubs will start computer-based testing as soon as they get back in the building, February. That's great. Quite a few people. Tracy Chase saying they've been trying remote testing. Hopefully it will expand. Yeah, that's been pretty common that some folks have gone right to remote testing. Maybe they haven't done computer-based testing, or maybe they have been doing computer-based testing, but been finding challenges with the remote testing. There's a lot that's needed at that student end in terms of student software, quality of internet signal, etc. South Suburban ABU will do so when they get back in the building. They'll try computer-based testing. Karen Walters said that they've been doing computer-based testing for years in Mankato, but during COVID that has been limited, and they will resume when they get back. No remote testing has been done there. Okay, excellent. Jill Rivard saying they've been doing remote testing with GED Ready and North Star. Excellent. Well, thank you all for your responses. It's helpful for us to see who's doing what. Is anyone doing computer-based testing at this point? Is anyone finding success with remote testing at this point? So thank you all for your responses. Maybe let's go to the next slide. And then we want to give an update about the distribution of computer-based tests. So currently we're trying to finish the initial distribution of tests to consortia that requested them. However, we run into a little bit of a roadblock. We have about 11 programs that have not finished the training or the setup of their account and haven't responded to Marty Olson's or Linda Keller's email about test training and setting up their account. So please, when you get an email from Marty Olson and Linda Keller asking about where the status of your training or the status of getting your account set up, please respond as soon as possible so that we know if you still want the test or if you still need more time to complete the training. We can't move into the next phase until we hear from these from all of the programs. So please respond to Marty and Linda's emails asking about some of this follow-up. Once we have all of the responses from all of the programs, then we can start planning the next phase, and that will happen hopefully sometime here this spring, where individual programs can submit test requests and we can distribute those directly to your account through Southwest ABE, and Marty and Linda would be able to do that. So please respond to Marty and Linda as they email inquiring about your test training and your test computer test accounts, and we'll look forward to more information for requests coming later this spring. Thanks everyone for all of your work on this. Okay, at this point, that's everything for assessment, so I'm going to turn it over to Julie to talk transitions and workforce. Julie.
All right, thank you, Brad. Just wanted to do a huge thank you to the ABE representatives that are serving on the workforce development boards. This has been a really, really busy year for them and what they've been tasked to do. And so thank you to all of those individuals. And if you do not know who your representative is, please go to mnabe.org and look under contacts and directories. And there is a directory there telling you who your representative is. Next slide, please. Email went out last week giving people an update on a few items. This went to the local board representatives and the adult basic education fiscal agents. And in that email, there was a reminder that I am asking that a memorandum of understanding, and this should have been signed July 1st of 2020, a copy of that is sent to our office. Send it directly to me, please. And the other piece is a copy of the infrastructure funding agreement. Typically, those are one and the same, but Minnesota asked for an extension on the infrastructure funding agreement. And so we got it extended beyond December 31st. And I've heard from quite a few board reps that they are currently in the process of developing these. And some of them are close to being finished, but as soon as that is finished, please send that to me as well. And then finally, the last piece is I need documentation that includes the process used to determine the ABE infrastructure contribution and the total contribution you are making. Remember, this can be in kind, but you still have to put a value to the in-kind contribution, and that has to be identified on this documentation. And I'm not asking for extensive paperwork. A simple paragraph saying this is how we figured our infrastructure funding agreement or funding costs will do. If you have questions about that, please feel free to reach out to me. And I can try to get answers from a deed or the Minnesota Association of Workforce Boards if that is needed. Next slide, please.
Julia, we have a question about whether you need a copy of the IFA from each consortium, or can they come from a group?
Actually, I was hoping this would come from the board representative on the local workforce development board.
Thanks, Julie.
However, I will say that it's important for, I'm hoping that the board rep is communicating with all consortia in that area of what they're writing in for infrastructure costs. They may not all ABE programs may be contributing to these costs, but they should still be aware of how these costs are being paid and who's paying them within that workforce development area, if that makes sense. So larger programs that are closer in the vicinity of the Career Force Center typically pay the majority of those costs because they're the ones who receive the most benefit from that relationship. Next slide, please. Oh, wait, can the member sign for all of us if we give them the go ahead? That is a process that needs, yes, they can. That is a process that needs to be determined in that area. I think Karen Walters, I'm going to base this off from a process I think you use where you developed a summary sheet or a quick sign off that all the ABE managers said, yes, the local board rep can sign off on our behalf. And they sent that to the board rep, and then the board rep signed for them. But they need to be given that permission in order to do that. Next slide, please. Looking forward now from January until the end of April, you'll be working on local and regional plans. They're due again in April. The Career Force Director typically takes the lead on this, and I just want to people to be aware that there's regional transitions funds can be used if you want to host a webinar or do something in regards to trying to pull ABE providers in your region together to provide input into the plan. And also the funds can be spent to support online networking or coffee breaks with your Career Force partners, just to get a better understanding of the services that they deliver and how to collaborate on better serving the clients that are shared within the WIOA programs. And also just a heads up that teachers should be included in these events as much as possible, since oftentimes they are the first people that a learner might go to when seeking out resources. And it is an expectation that we as a WIOA partner, a program partner, are also providing referrals back to these other programs to better support learners and clients. Next slide, please. Just a separate heads up that in February you will be receiving a survey. It has just 5 basic questions with 3 demographic questions, and this is coming from a committee, a Career and Technical Education Committee, that's trying to better understand ways that we can integrate some of our work. And we're looking around training opportunities that might provide the best service to you as providers. So that will be coming out in February. February is Career and Technical Education Month. And I believe that's it. I think we're moving on to Astrid.
Yes, thanks, Julie. So this is our final section here. Want to make sure that people are aware of some of the upcoming professional development opportunities we have available. First, again, I just wanted to thank everybody who responded to our statewide PD survey. We had about 200 responses this time, and we really appreciate you all taking the time to respond. We know how chaotic and overwhelming this year has been for everyone in local programs. So thank you for taking that time. We started really digging into the results here in early January. Our state team and our support network providers and our statewide professional development committee. So we're in the process of reviewing and analyzing those results. We'll be using them to inform upcoming professional development and those supplemental service grant RFPs. And watch in the coming months for a summary of the results in your MN ABE Connect newsletter. Let's go to the next slide. We have another statewide conference coming up here at the end of January. January 28th and 29th will be the Virtual Language and Literacy Institute. This is always a very well received event with some longer workshops that dig into language and literacy instruction. Registration is now open. It is free, and there are many really excellent sessions that are going to be offered. We've listed some of them here. Encourage you to pass this along to your teachers. Some sessions here that managers may be interested in as well. So hope that you can attend that event in just a couple of weeks. We also, as we have moved to all virtual events this year, will not be holding our in-person regionals this spring. We'll miss seeing all of you. That is something that we really look forward to every year, is going out to the regionals and connecting with all of you. But we will be connecting via Zoom for a spring statewide conference, again, in lieu of the regionals this spring. It's going to be held on March 5th, a full day conference. With a general session, as Susan mentioned, we'll be rolling out and updating folks on a variety of distance learning resources and approval processes. Those updates will be given. There'll be 12 concurrent sessions, and we're planning some regional coffee breaks this time, give you an opportunity to connect with others in your region as well as folks around the state. And registration for that event will be opening on February 9th. A variety of upcoming webinars. This Thursday will be a CCRS focused webinar on fostering independent learners. Lane has been facilitating a number of manager meetups. The next one will be focused on learning models, an opportunity to exchange plans and thoughts with the learning models you're planning for the spring. Our next Adult Career Pathways webinar focused on connecting with employers and career force, and then a one-room schoolhouse webinar in mid-April, and many more. Go over to the Atlas PD calendar to see everything that's being offered, and that's where you can register for those events as well. And just a reminder that many of the webinars have been archived on our Minnesota ABE PD YouTube channel. That is a great resource. We know that schedules are busy. You may not be able to catch something live. So encourage you to go over there to check it out. This is also a really good resource for staff meetings or professional development days. We've heard from some programs that are using these archived webinars as content for their local professional development. So that's another way that you can use these resources. Let's go to the next slide. Also wanted to remind folks that Literacy Minnesota now has a Foundations of Remote Tutoring certificate. Volunteers can be a really wonderful resource to your programs, and especially right now as you're managing a variety of different learning models and trying to serve learners at a distance. We know that a number of programs have been really successful in incorporating volunteers into their program to help students with virtual classes, virtual one-on-one tutoring, with some of that digital navigation that can be really time intensive. So we encourage you to take advantage of these virtual trainings that are available to help your volunteers get up to speed and ready to support learners in a remote environment. Go to the next slide. And then finally want to make sure that everyone saves the date. This has been a topic of conversation for a year now, as we've been thinking about how to help our adult education practitioners meet the relatively new relicensure requirement for cultural competency training. So there are a variety of trainings that have been offered throughout the state, in person in the past and now virtual. But we've now, through Atlas, we are going to be offering an ABE specific PELSB approved relicensure cultural competency training that will be offered on April 16th and 30th. Both days will be required. It will be virtual, and there'll be some activities in between to help people reflect on the content. And that's going to be led by Dr. Rose Chu, who is someone who is one of the PELSB approved cultural competency facilitators, and actually had worked with us at the Department of Education for a while. So excited to work with her again through the cultural competency training. So if you or any of the others at your program still need these CEUs for cultural competency, this is a great opportunity to get those, and registration will be opening up later this spring.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Astrid. That's a lot of great helpful updates for us with professional development. I want to remind everyone that the materials tab is still here with the 6 materials for you. However, the recording, the slides, and the handouts will be posted on the Literacy Action Network website, so you can always look there for this information as well. Our next web chat is Wednesday, March 10th from 1 to 2:30. There's a registration link there that you can get from the PDF of the slides. We look forward to seeing you then. And just thank you all for everything. And we really encourage you to please fill out the evaluation after the webinar. And that is very helpful for us as we move forward and plan our upcoming webinars and our upcoming sessions. So we hope that you make it a great year. And right now we're going to take the rest of the time to answer your questions. What additional questions do you have? We'd love to hear from you. But feel free to raise any questions that came up from any of the topics we discussed today, or if there are other questions that you have for us, please let us know. To ask questions, you can click to raise your hand, or you can just type them in the chat. Either way works for us. Good question. This one comes up quite a bit. Renata was asking, can we talk more about when hours start counting again for funding purposes? At this point, we anticipate that contact hours and proxy hours would be used for funding purposes starting May 1, 2021, and that would be for funding in 2022 to 23. However, we acknowledge that we're not sure what the situation will look like yet at that time. If there's significant disruption, and if the teacher verification model and some of these new revised ways for counting distance education are not fully implemented, and there's still a lot of disruption with the number of contact hours, we'll have to rediscuss that, and maybe we'll need to propose some additional solutions, potentially with our contact hour work group or some other entity as well. So While we anticipate May 1st being that date where contact hours again will be used for determining funding, we don't know that yet because we're not sure what the situation will look like in May. But again, we encourage you to please focus on serving your communities the best way possible, and that we're going to try to work with you to be as flexible as possible looking forward. Anyone else from the team want to add anything to that? I'm taking it that means no.
I think you covered it, Brad. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that sounds like the right answer, Brad.
Excellent. What other questions do folks have?
I wanted to circle back to a question that came up earlier that we didn't address. So I think it was Patty from Duluth who asked in the chat about the timing for the federal application. Oh, and maybe that question is coming back. Oh, yeah, Patty. So the federal application, I think we have not made a for certain plan for that, but I do think it is likely that it will be due in the spring of 2022. And yes, it will be there. It will require some narrative answers to questions, not just tables like the annual application. Brad or anyone else, did you want to add any more to that?
No, I agree that I think the due date will likely be, last time it was due in March, this time it will likely be maybe early March, maybe even in as early as late February, where that could be due. But again, we haven't talked with the grants department to set that firm process, and Jody and I will be working with the grants department here soon to try to work out a solid plan along with the rest of the adult education team. Any other
Brad, we had another
questions?
question coming in about NRS testing and expectations for testing using NRS approved assessments and the timeline for programs needing to do that rather than using, I'm assuming, I'm reading into this question a bit, but the provisional EFLs.
Great question. So at this point, we don't see that in-person testing is universal across the state, and that we also don't see remote testing being a viable option for all of our students. So we're not yet at that point where we can remove the provisional COVID exemption as a possibility within our database. Once we either move into in-person programming is across the state, and or remote testing is accessible to pretty much any student in the state. Once one of those two things happen, then we plan on removing the use of the COVID EFL exception. The only other way that this would also be taken away is if the feds require us in some way, shape, or form to take that away. However, they've made no mention of eliminating that possibility on our end. Jody, Astrid, Julie, anything you'd add?
I wanted to maybe read something else into Teresa's question. So I guess, Teresa, if you're listening and you want to clarify more specifically what you were asking, but I wondered if you were asking about when there might be a program improvement process, again, based on level gain rates. And I think we can say that there will not be a traditional program improvement process this fall based on the current year's level gains for obvious reasons, because we don't expect those level gains to be normal. But we are trying to think creatively about how our team can offer some technical assistance instead of program improvement this year. So if that's what you were asking, that's that answer.
Excellent. One other question came in from Emily. Emily said, could you please speak to the absence of guidance being provided from MDE that specifically addresses ABE programming? The guidance for children is not necessarily appropriate for adults, but we are in a classroom setting and many have licensed teachers. It's a great question. At this point, a lot of the guidance on revisions to the Safe Learning Plan and on the recent guidance from the governor have taken place at the commissioner level and at the governor level. We have not been involved or included in those conversations for setting guidance. And so at this point, we've not had additional guidance that we can truly give that's different than the guidance we have given before. And so that has been a bit something on our part where we haven't had much to say because we haven't had any change in our guidance going forward. Anyone on the team want to say anything more on their thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I acknowledge the truth in your statement, Emily, that the guidance coming from the governor's office, that has the MDE branding on it has not specifically referred to ABE. And I think that reflects the fact that we are such a small system compared to K-12. I think practically speaking, and I'm assuming this is probably what you all are doing, I think what you can take from the guidance is that our ABE programs, in terms of our physical programming spaces and regulations and guidance around that, are most similar to high schools. So I think you can extrapolate that way, but yeah, you're not wrong. And candidly, it probably won't be any different, at least in this sort of pandemic related guidance. I think there just isn't capacity to get to that level in that statewide guidance.
This seems to somewhat relate to not just the short term, but long term. Teresa's asking that they're needing to do more long-term planning regarding the future of ABE and the new reality. Will there be assistance to help us think this through? And so I think that's a good question. And from our end, what kind of assistance would help you think about the new reality of ABE long-term? I guess I'd like to hear what forms of assistance, what types of conversations would you look for that could really help you during this time? Teresa's thinking maybe if we had another meeting to focus specifically on planning at the local and statewide level on the future of ABE, maybe. Teresa will also look into that crystal ball. Maybe that's something you can try to purchase with your with any additional funds you might have available.
And I would encourage people, if there are specific questions or topics related to that you would like to discuss with us and with other managers, either put those in the chat or when you complete your evaluation, share those and we can use them for planning future web chats or other future statewide meetings.
Excellent. Yeah, so as you have questions on that, we can look and see about developing. Maybe we would schedule another meeting, or maybe we would reprioritize our March web chat to really have more of an in-depth conversation on the future and on planning. One other question came in, and that is from Julie Fitek, asking about where should questions about our GED related questions go. Those questions can go to Todd Wagner, or they can also go to me, or both. Either one of us can answer those questions at this time. Okay, I hear you, Penny. I understand your need to maybe want to go outside and take a walk. It is a beautiful day outside, so I encourage any of you that need to do that, go ahead. It's been great talking with you. Great ideas, Nadine, about what we might want to think about here in the future and what we might want to include in that future conversation.